Hello and welcome to the world-famous CBB Supershow on the world-famous FTN Network. I'm your host, Walt Waddell, a.k.a. Dub-Deuce85, and if you're hanging with me, it means you are a college basketball super freak, and you love it as much as I do. There's no DFS, there's no sports betting, there's no prize picks or anything to do with it, money-making opportunities in college basketball right now. But what we're doing is we're doing the legwork. We're taking a look at all these player personnel, transfers in, transfers out, draft declarations, all of this information. We're taking it in, throwing it in the mixer, mixing it up, taking a big gulp of it, and then I'm giving it to you in a consumable form so that you have all the information needed and you're going to know these rosters inside and out so that when the season does start, as we head into late October, early November, you go trick-or-treating with your kids, you're doing your thing, it dawns on you, you come home from the trick-or-treating with the family and you're like, damn, man, my guy Dub, it's about time for college basketball. I got to be checking them out. Man, I don't know the rosters. Oh, what am I going to do? I'm so unprepared. I got to, you're not going to feel that way. Basically, what's going to happen when you finish trick-or-treating on Halloween, you're going to say, you know what? My man Dub's taking care of me all summer long. I know everybody from, the kid that transferred from UMKC. I know Butler's starting five, the Euro foreign trip of St. John's. I know Coach Ricky P. I know what kind of offense they're going to run. I know what this rotation is going to look like. I am ready. Thank you, Dub, for having me ready. I am going to absolutely obliterate all of November, all of December, and into March. We're going to pay for yet another. You know what? I got a washer and dryer. What's the next appliance that my man Dub can help me pay for? I don't know. An oven? You need a fridge? What do you need? Let me help you make some money to pay for that. Make your wife, your kids, your family happy. So if you're supporting me, I'm supporting you. I appreciate it. The people that are watching the show right now are the hardcore fans, and I appreciate it. USFL is going on, and CFL is about to start. NBA playoffs are doing their thing, and there's an MLB grind going on. There's golf. There's, esports. There's all this stuff going on, and we're playing it, and FTN's got all the best content in the world. Please believe it. We're in Yahoo Finance. We've got just like there's the proof is in the pudding with the content. But if you live and you breathe and you eat and you sleep college sports, college football, college basketball, then I F with you tough. You F with me tough. We're going to be hanging out all summer long. The next month and a half, we're going to be talking nothing but college basketball, transfer portal, draft camp, G League camp, combine, all this stuff, internalizing roster moves. We covered the ACC in full. Last week, we talked about every single roster and how it would apply to, fantasy, who we thought was a sneak, who was going to be the player to watch, all this stuff. And, after that, there was more ACC moves that happened, an incredible amount of transferring and stuff happening. But like I said, you're going to be completely ready for the season because of the summer we're going to spend together. By mid-July, we're going to snap our fingers. We're going to hop over to college football. We're going to do our thing. We're going to go conference by conference of college football. And I'm going to have you ready for the season by week 0, which starts August 26th. Mark your calendars. Week 0 of the college football season. It'll be here before you know it. Trust me, fair season, carnival season, it's all super fun. But afterwards, your pocket's feeling a little light. You look at the bank account, there's a few less zeros. We're heading into week 0, speaking of, and you're saying, my man Dub's going to have me taken care of. For the past few weeks here, we've been talking about college football. We're all previewed up. We know who to play. Let's see these salaries. Oh my God, he said this was going to be the WR1. He's priced at $3,500. Nobody knows who this kid is. I'm all in. Let's go. So that's what we're doing here. So please continue to support the Super Show in whatever iteration it is, the CBB Super Show or the CFB Super Show. We bounce back and forth here. I am working on some guests for the summer, whether that's some coaches, some players, some other people in the media. What I'm really trying to do here is continue to build the brand, continue to roll the momentum. We had incredible momentum through February and March. We had a lot of people watching, a lot of listeners, a lot of stuff happening. It is the slow season, but I continue to grind out this content, and I'm very thankful that FTN allows me to do that and really use Wednesday nights as an opportunity for me to talk to you guys about what's going on with the college basketball world, but also to continue to educate myself and keep myself fully engaged. I'll be engaged either way, but knowing that I have a duty and a serve to be of service to you guys means that I'm going to be on it, from morning to night. I have a job that I'm blessed to have the computer, the phone in front of me, and I'm able to check these transfers in real time, and I'm able to internalize them, give my take on Twitter. If you're not following me on Twitter, you probably are if you're here at DubDeuces85. Make sure you're turning on notifications. Yes, I talk about, Star Wars sometimes. Sometimes I talk about this and that. But for the most part, I'm talking about college sports. And you guys can rest assured any relevant transfer, any relevant roster news, I'm going to be posting it. I'm going to be retweeting. I'm going to be quote tweeting. I'm going to be doing my own tweets. The WNBA season is starting, and I would encourage you to stay with me for notifications on that. We're in preseason for WNBA. It's going to be a lot of content for that as well, and we're doing our thing. But I just absolutely love this transfer stuff, man. I love it. I know a lot of people hate it, but I love it. It's my thing, and I'm really, really, really into it, and I appreciate you guys continue to support me. All right, so last week, like I said, we talked about the ACC. We went on through and really just talked about the various moves, what we thought. Teams like Wake Forest that I really believe in was going to, be able to turn the corner and make the tournament. And we really talked in depth about their roster and what they looked like. Now, Miami, since last week, Miami made a big move. We talked about, they had been pretty quiet in the portal. They've lost a bunch of players. They really haven't added anyone. The Nigel Pack, Bensley Joseph, Wooga Poplar, Norchad O'Meara group looks pretty good. We did say they need to add a player like Matthew Cleveland to be a Jordan Miller replacement. What do? They go out, they land Matthew Cleveland. So I did want to update that Miami has landed Matthew Cleveland. Huge, huge news. Very, very big. That is massive. Clemson adds another guard, Joey Girard, the big shooter. He's going to be able to return to his high-scoring form. It is worth noting that PJ Hall is in the camps. I believe he's in the I want to say he's in the G League camp. I don't know if he got the NBA draft combine call yet. So PJ Hall still, status in flux at the moment. But they go ahead and add Joey Girard. They have a really nice group of guards there with Joe Girard, Chase Hunter, Jake Heidbreder, Jack Clark, looking pretty good. So those are some of the main moves there that have happened. Louisville, they go out and get Trey White of USC since we were last on air last week. So they add a guard, a much-needed guard there in case Sky Clark doesn't work out. So moves are happening, man. Moves are happening. But this week, we're going to be talking about the Big East, all things Big East. We want to really gear up. Big 12 has been, I want to switch gears here. Big 12 has been the dominant conference in college basketball for a few years, for decades, really. But Kansas, Baylor, Texas, all these teams, and they're really known as the cream of the crop when it comes to college basketball. I know the Big Ten gets their love, but they falter in the tournament. SEC, they end up beating each other up. It's always the Big 12 this, Big 12 that, and they're the ones in the Final Four. But things are changing a bit. We are shifting gears. We're seeing a changing of the guard a little bit. Your national champion, the UConn Huskies, they come aboard. They win the title. They're the national champions. They have a championship window. I've been telling everybody this. Their championship window easily open for the next 3, 4, 5 years. They're going to turn in at least 2 more Final Fours in the next 4 to 5 years. I can guarantee that. They're going to turn in at least 1 title game, possibly 2 title game appearances with another championship in there in the next 5 years. The way that the roster is built, the way they're recruiting, the way they're hitting the portal, and the way that Coach Hurley, the good Hurley, not Bobby and Hurley, but the good Hurley. Their championship window is wide open. But the Big East isn't just a one-trick pony. They're not just UConn. There are several other rosters and other teams in the Big East that have done some pretty significant things, and they're going to be able to compete for deep tournament runs. We're talking second weekend, Sweet 16, Elite 8, Final Four, possibly a title game appearance by someone other than UConn. What am I talking about? How can I say such things? The Big East? Nah, no way. No, definitely way. Let me talk about it. Let's get into the Big East. And if you're watching live, I know a lot of you are watching this show on demand because it's late, and we're not this is a program for you to really watch in your own time and really go back to and study up on teams and what I have to say about certain rosters. But if you are watching live, you want to ask any questions, you want to interact, feel free to do so, and I will check that throughout. All right, so starting at the top, and not the top in terms of my projected, but just alphabetical order for ease, the Butler Bulldogs. My man, Rob, the dog, and profile picture that he has. You know him as how the pros do it. Butler is his team. Big Butler fan. I'm not really a big Butler fan by any means. I think they're a pretty porous program. It was a long decade ago when they made back-to-back, tourney title appearances. Things are kind of dire with the way the state of the roster is, but they do bring in some talent both on the recruiting side and through the portal. Let's start with departed players first. They do lose Jaden Taylor, who averaged about 13 and a half points per game. That's a fairly tough loss there, losing a guy like Jaden Taylor, right? He's kind of was starting to develop into a fairly solid scoring, a guy could hit shots, get to the basket, turning himself into a relatively strong 3-level scorer and somebody that they were starting to rely on heavily as their go-to guy there. We saw in the pre-conference games, Seamus Lukosius was the guy. And then once they went into conference play, it really became the Jaden Taylor show. He's off. He's gone to NC State, so he's heading out. That's a tough loss for them. Seamus Lukosius, who I just mentioned, he is in the transfer portal. He has actually committed to the Cincinnati Bearcats. Interesting for him to go there. We'll see how that works out. Chuck Harris, our man Chuck Harris, who has been up and down throughout his career, a big-time scorer as well, is headed to SMU, where I think he's going to have the opportunity to shoot 20-plus times a game, have a very high usage rate, so he is gone. Miles Tate is off to Appalachian State. We know he's gone. Pierce Thomas, not really a big deal. He's off to Eastern Kentucky. Another guy that they lost, DJ Hughes, just recently hit the portal. He was a second-year kid, had some upside as a 4. Gone. Not going to see him around. Miles Wilmuth, not Helmuth like the poker player, but Wilmuth. He's off to Hofstra. So he was a bench piece for them that is now gone as well. Manny Bates in flux. He's gone. Ali headed back to Akron, so they lose him as well. So it's a pretty significant kind of a rebuild here with the way that they lost. Eric Hunter, of course, is out of eligibility. So they lose a 13-point per game guy, a 12-point per game guy, a 10, an 8, a 6.5, a 3, a 2, a 1, and a 2. So a lot of scoring. As I mentioned, Manny Bates kind of in limbo. We're not quite sure what's going to happen with him. Really, the only players for Butler that are going to return are Jalen Thomas, solid, averaged 7 points per game last year. Connor Turnbull, who is a high energy guy, and then John Michael Malloy, who was a redshirt. So nobody super significant except Jalen Thomas, who will probably see some decent minutes again this year. The roster coming in for Butler, it wasn't knockout to this point. They do bring in some talent. We'll start with the kid, the post, Andre Screen, who they bring in from Bucknell as a grad transfer. He is going to likely split time in the post with Jalen Thomas. There'll be some times where they'll play 4 and 5 together. Andre Screen, highest usage rate on Bucknell this past year. He's a 7'1" kid, about 270. Had a 22% defensive rebounding rate, a 6% block rate, drew about 5 fouls per 40. Got maybe 4.5, 5 fouls per 40 called on him as well. Not a great free throw shooter, but he definitely is a solid shot blocker and a great rebounder for that level. I think in the Big East with his size, as long as he doesn't foul a bunch, he should definitely be pretty decent. And we'll have to play big minutes for Butler here, depending on how things go and the maturation, the further development of a guy like Jalen Thomas or even John Michael Malloy coming off of that red shirt. That is the main big coming in. Then they bring in a ton of guards. They do have Pierre Brooks coming in, the Michigan State kid. He has a ton of upside. He didn't get a lot of time for the Spartans. It's pretty tough to get minutes if you're a fringe guard or a younger guard on that team this year, right? Jaden Akins, Tyson Walker, AJ Hoggard. Like, there's some really strong guards on that roster, and it just wasn't easy for Pierre Brooks to get minutes. And he's kind of a 2-3 combo, hybrid guy. He had some injuries. He just couldn't get in the flow of things. You might remember early to mid-November, he did start some games, and he was actually playing quite well. He played 30, 35 minutes a game throughout November, and those were against teams like Alabama, Notre Dame, Northwestern, and Oregon. He wasn't a slouch. The game against Oregon, in which they won 74-70, he did score 15 points. He did have 6 rebounds. A pretty solid outing there. The game against Portland right after that, a couple of days later, in 30 minutes, he scored 15 points, 2 rebounds, had an assist, hit a bunch of threes in that game. Against Portland, he was 4 of 4, and against Oregon, 3 of 11. So definitely comfortable taking 3 against Northwestern in December in a loss. He shot 3 of 7 from downtown. So there's a lot of upside here for Brooks. I actually like him quite a bit coming into the season. I think he has the opportunity to be a pretty significant piece for DFS purposes, depending on how the starting lineup shakes up. But I think he's going to be the one that takes that spot of that left behind by Jaden Taylor. They also bring in the Northeastern transfer, Jamil Telfort. He's a little bit of an older kid. Somebody that, won't necessarily get rattled when things are tough. Big East has some real high-quality perimeter defense. Telfort on Northeastern, 27% shot rate, 25% usage rate. Shot about 33% from long range. A solid free throw shooter. He's mainly a scorer. He's pretty tall. They have him playing, a lot of off guard. He's tall enough to defend other teams' threes and maybe even some small ball 4 stuff. Played a ton of minutes, the 8th most minutes in the conference there for Northeastern. So he is somebody that I think can come in here and have some good games. There towards the end of the season there, he was playing roughly 36, 38, 40 minutes a game when there were some couple overtimes and just a guy that didn't get rattled and shot a bunch and a big time score. So another guy that can generate points for this Butler program, and they're definitely going to need that. They need all the scoring that they can get on a roster like this. They also bring in DJ Davis from UC Irvine, a somewhat prolific 3-point shooter. You have to really, the NIT game against Oregon where he really burned us, you have to really kind of shake that off. He did shoot 41% from long range this year, had a shot rate over 28%. Him and Dawson Baker, the key components of that Irvine team, both gone. In conference, shot about 36%. He was awful in that NIT game against Oregon. I mean, really bad, right? He shot 3 of 15 or something like that. He did shoot better in the second half there. But you look at it going into that game, he shot 5 of 8 from downtown, 3 of 6, 6 of 11. 3 of 11, 4 of 5. Like, this kid can shoot the shit out of the ball. When they played Oregon on their floor on November 11th this past season, they won that game by 13. He hit 6 triples against them at 24 points. So the kid can definitely play against upper tier competition and not fold. Another good scorer. He's able to create his own shot, but he's a little bit better off when he's not the focal point and he's able to, get it off the dish. So I think he's going to turn into more of a catch and shoot type of guy while Telford and Brooks and of course my man Posh Alexander break down the defender off the dribble and make some things happen. And Davis will be there, off of double teams and on the kick out. So yeah, they do bring in Posh Alexander, my man, the Posh play of the day. Of course, it's named after him. So we know how much I love Posh Alexander. Going into it, playing for Butler, I think it's a weird fit. I would have liked him to, honestly, I thought the perfect fit for him was Seton Hall. Like, to me, Seton Hall under Coach Holloway would have been so great because he's good on defense, right? He can dribble. He's a great passer. He could have really flourished and learned, how to be a better offensive playmaker there under him. They do lose, by the way, Seton Hall loses Femi Odekale. I thought it would have been hilarious and actually a really good trade, if you will, for Odekale to go to St. John's and Posh to go to Seton Hall, but it wasn't in the cards. Instead, Posh goes to Butler, where I anticipate him being the starting point guard for them. They do have Landon Moore coming in, who is technically a freshman, I believe, a second-year freshman, coming in from St. Francis. Let's see. Let me pull up his stuff. St. Francis, PA. It was an absolute horrible defense, horrible offense. Just overall an awful team this year. They were not good. But Landon Moore, as a freshman, really strong assist rate, a really good three-point shooter, just under 40%. Definitely showed ability, and he's a really young kid, so they'll be able to, under Thad, kind of develop him a little bit further. It'll be nice for him because he can play behind Posh. Posh can be the starter for the next 2 years, and Landon can really start to develop and develop more of a shot and become more of a strong scorer. So I actually looking into it, because we joke about it in the group DM that I'm in and how bad Butler is to give Rob a hard time, but looking at it, their guards are actually pretty solid. We know known commodities, Posh Alexander, DJ Davis. Telfort was solid at the mid-major level. Landon Moore is a young kid who has a ton of upside. And then Pierre Brooks, who I think is absolutely going to turn himself into one of the best players on this Butler team. They also have Finley Bizjack coming in and Bowden Kapke. They're really going to be testing us with these names this year. Finley Bizjack is a guy that I think can play some three or really kind of slide into the Seamus Lukosius role. He is a devastating scorer, or he has been at the high school level, a strong enough rebounder and a strong enough passer. Now at the high school level, of course, we're going to see these guys coming in, but Bizjack is really going to be a big time shooter. Him and DJ Davis are going to be able to plant themselves, in the corners and allow the other playmakers to do their thing, break the defense down. And there's going to be a lot of open looks, and they really need guys like Screen, Jalen Thomas to be adequate on the block. They're not going to draw double teams, but if they can, the 7-footer can, really get a smaller team and really dominate on the block, force a team to send a help defender, that's going to open things up. And if Bizjack and Davis are hitting threes, this Butler offense could be devastating at times. I'm not saying they're going to go out and win the Big East or even make the tournament, but they're not as bad as people are going to project them to be. They're really, really interesting, and the pieces that are fitting together are starting to look pretty good on paper. I'm still thinking that their interior is going to be a little suspect, but this guard group here of Telfort, Brooks, Moore, Bizjack, Posh, and Davis looks really interesting to me. So I don't hate what I'm seeing out of Butler here. Moving on to Creighton, a team whose fans were all over me last year. I didn't believe the hype on Creighton. I did not feel like they were a Final Four team, and they almost made me pay. They ended up making themselves a pretty solid run through the tournament, but they are losing a ton of pieces, man. Ryan Nembhard, we know, off to Gonzaga to carry on with his brother's legacy. Flipped at the last moment. He was crystal balling to Arizona and ends up going to Gonzaga. They, of course, today Arthur Kaluma hits the portal. He's actually he's in the draft combine, doesn't have to do the G League thing. He's already got an invite. He's really heavily angling to go to the NBA draft. He does not, it sounds like he doesn't want to come back to college, but he gave himself that option because tomorrow is the last day. And we're going to see a lot of fireworks with the portal here, guys. The 11th of May, so tomorrow, is the last day to announce that your intentions are to go to the portal. If you don't do it by tomorrow and you haven't done it yet, then you're not doing it. It's just not going to happen for you. So Kaluma did declare or hit the portal today in addition to already being in the draft. So we'll see what happens there. But I've been hearing Kaluma was going to transfer for a while if he came back, but his preference is to go to the draft. So we'll see what happens there. But suddenly it's like, what's going on? They lose Isaac Trout. They got Isaac Trout as a transfer from Virginia as a decent enough piece. They do get Jonathan Lawson by way of Memphis. He's still super young. He's played a couple of years in college, but because of the reclass and the COVID year, he's actually got like 3 seasons left, and he's still pretty young, all things considering. And then Stephen Ashworth, one of the best players on Utah State they bring in as the Ryan Nembhard replacement. So they are bringing in pieces. They do get Baylor Shireman, who already said he'll be back. We're waiting on the status of Ryan Kalkbrenner. They do have Frederick King back, who when Kalkbrenner, had the mono thing going on and missed time, Frederick King for 2 or 3 games looked really, really good. And we've seen Mason Miller has shown flashes as well as another young guy. And we expect Trey Alexander to also return. However, he has been invited to the draft camps as well. So we'll see what happens there. I think Trey Alexander will behoove him to get some info and come back. And really, enhance his draft stock. I think Trey Alexander on this team without a Ryan Nembhard, without a Arthur Kaluma, could really put up some sickening numbers. So hopefully he makes that decision. But as of right now, it's a pretty tough situation here. They're not looking great. Ashworth, Shireman, Lawson, Trey Alexander, Mason Miller, Ryan Kalkbrenner, and Frederick King. They need some additional pieces. They do have some freshman commits who are at this moment, honoring those commitments. Josiah Dotzler and I believe Brock Weiss. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, Creighton not necessarily looking all that great. Also, Francisco Farabello is still on the team. Little use, their only bench piece from last year. They're definitely going to rely on him to a degree. And I think Isaac Trout, the transfer from Virginia, actually will play a much bigger piece than I originally thought. And I do kind of like him a little bit better now as I've had time to kind of study and really internalize his moves to Creighton. I think he'll play an important part. But this roster doesn't scare me. This Creighton roster is clearly going to take a step back. However, for DFS purposes, we knew Creighton was always, there's these guys are 7K to 8K. The starting lineup plays all the minutes, which is great, but they cannibalize each other. Some games it's Calc, some games it's Baylor, some games it's Trey, some games it's Arthur. It was really difficult to figure that out. I believe they're going to be a short rotation once again, but the pecking order to me at this moment looks very clear. And especially if Trey Alexander doesn't return, we're going to be seeing a Baylor Shireman that is going to be absolutely medieval. We're going to see him put up ridiculous numbers, probably something closer to what we saw when he was at South Dakota State times a million. He shot 47% from distance his final season at South Dakota State. Obviously took a step back, shot 36% this past year, but his volume was a lot higher. But we're going to see him take a ton of shots here potentially. His shot rate was down around 21% this past year. We might see that bounce way, way up. I'm talking like 25, 26, 27%, depending on what happens with Ryan Kalkbrenner, depending on what happens with Trey Alexander. So there is a lot to really kind of iron out here. But at this moment for DFS, prop betting, all that stuff, definitely Baylor Shireman looks like a major winner. We could see him average 20 points per game. If Trey Alexander returns, Ryan Kalkbrenner returns, Arthur Kaluma has a last-minute change of heart, then we won't see that. But as of now, he looks really, really good. All right, moving on to DePaul. Moshe Gibson is gone, the high-level role player that they asked to turn into a star. He turned in a good season, averaged 16 points per game. He did pretty well. Javon Johnson, likely gone. Errol Penn, Yoranai, Ahmad Bynum has hit the transfer portal. Tyron Grant Foster, and Philman Geberit. So that is who's out. It looks to me like Nick Ongenda will be back. He's had some health issues for years, but having him back, and it looks like one of the key pieces that was expected to leave has now had a change of heart. Deshaun Nelson, getting him back in the mix for DePaul is quite important. Jalen Terry, who showed a lot of upside his first year, fell off last year. He'll be back. Zion Cruz, who has pedigree, highly rated recruit. Kind of a sleepy first season, but I expect him to take a next step forward. And my man, Caleb Murphy, was really good at South Florida. I kept pushing him for a while there, a couple of weeks. Didn't really work out for us. I think he takes a major step forward. He'll kind of slide in and take some of that usage that is left behind by Gibson and Johnson. I'm pretty confident in that. They do bring in the gunner, the scorer from South Carolina, Chico Carter. He's got real solid ability. Jaden Henley from Minnesota, who I think has the potential to be a star in this conference. Elijah Fisher, who has a ton of upside from Texas Tech, and Jeremiah Odin, who comes from Wyoming and is kind of a jack-of-all-trades type of player. So DePaul has some nice pieces coming in. They're going to be the bottom of the barrel when it comes to the Big East teams. I think they'll be slightly better as the season goes on. They might be real bad early on, but they at least have the pieces, and there's a lot of talent here that needs to be developed. Like Jaden Henley coming from Minnesota, he looked to me like he was going to be like Minnesota's primary option in the 2 years. Him leaving definitely hurts them to a degree, but I think he's going to step in and be a very integral piece here immediately. Playing him next to a scoring guard like Chico Carter will be beneficial. If either Jalen Terry or Zion Cruz actually take a step forward, that will be huge as well. And then you have those secondary pieces like Elijah Fisher. They have a JUCO kid by the name of Keandre Young who will give them minutes. Jeremiah Young can play some 3 and 4. Deshaun Nelson plays some 4. And then you have the massive gap in the center. If Nick Ongenda doesn't return, that's a big, big problem because they'll be massively undersized and they'll have to play some small ball. And then you'll see some of these big East centers come in and absolutely dominate them. So we'll see what happens with DePaul's front court. But as of now, they're going to be bad. But I think they'll be a established pecking order. Guys to watch, Jaden Henley, and of course, Zion Cruz, Chico Carter, Jalen Terry, see how that works out. There's a lot of usage to go around, and we'll see how that is established once we see them over the summer play some of these preseason exhibition games that they do, whether that is a foreign trip or some secret scrimmages that happen that we get access to. All right, Georgetown Hoyas finally moving on from Mr. Patrick Ewing. He rides the surprise tournament run from a couple years ago, gets an extension, and just atrocious run from there. Similar to what Coach Tinkle at Oregon State is going through after his tournament run. His hot seat it's not even hot. It's just like they're expecting to get rid of him, but they paid him so much money and it's Oregon State basketball that they're kind of stuck with him. So it seems like he ain't even trying. When we get to the Pac-12 show in a couple weeks, like that Oregon State roster is awful. Anyways, Patrick Ewing, he's gone. They bring in Mr. Ed Cooley, who I think is going to have this Hoyas program back to relevance very quick. Now, they lose a ton of pieces. Primo Spears gone, Brandon Murray gone, Quetus Wahab gone again, Bryson Mazzone, Jordan Riley, Bradley Azuero, Denver Anglin, Malcolm Wilson, and of course from 2 years ago, Dante Harris, who we know from last week talking about with Virginia, is off to the Cavaliers to play in the ACC, where he will be an integral part to the lineup there for them. So there's a lot of pieces here that Georgetown is losing. I mean, they have to really retool and it's going to be a weird first year for Cooley coming off what he had with Providence, where he was been a contender. They had a couple sleepy seasons, but typically Cooley always had a really good, 2-3 guys in his starting lineup, and he recruited well, hit the portal well enough. So I expect this Hoyas team to be really turned over and really competitive in no time at all. Will it be this year? Perhaps not. The talent that they bring in is at least interesting. First, they're bringing back Jay Heath, who has been eternally injured, but fingers crossed that it works out for him. I do expect a Cook to return, Wayne Bristol, and Ryan Mutombo. So a couple of pieces, not super important, but some pieces here. They do have a 4-star by the name of Drew Fielder coming in. We'll see what he's all about. Jaden Epps, who is the transfer from Illinois. I think he has a really big opportunity to be a big-time, stud in the DFS world at least. Dontrez Styles, who North Carolina never really used properly, was really good in high school and has a ton of athletic upside. I think it'll be interesting to see how Cooley unlocks him. The redshirt transfer from Texas, Rowan Brumbaugh, really quite an intriguing prospect. He was originally committed to Northwestern, backed out and decided to go to Texas, play for Beard, but then that didn't work out either, and he just couldn't, get in there. So I expect him to play right away for Cooley and get big minutes. Rowan Brumbaugh is really good. Now, those of you who haven't got a chance to see him play because he didn't get to play minutes for Texas, should do some research, watch some clips on YouTube. Maybe I'll tweet some stuff later. He's awesome. I'm actually really excited to see him in what I believe to be a starter role and possibly even a high usage role at some points for Georgetown, depending on how the rest of the lineup shakes out and other moves that Cooley might be expected to make. They also bring in from Kansas State, well-traveled Ishmael Massoud. A good piece, played a a solid enough role for Kansas State during their tournament run. I don't want to sit here and tell you he's a critical role because I don't think he was, but he can hit a three. He can defend a little bit. He's a good depth piece. As it stands, you're looking at a starting five of, let's see here. Jaden Epps, Jay Heath, Rowan Brumbaugh, probably Dontrez Styles. And then as a center, you're looking at a cook, I guess. Doesn't strike fear in the hearts of anyone. And Drew Fielder might even be able to work himself into the starting lineup over Dontrez Styles right away. We'll see how that shakes out. And there's an argument to be made for Wayne Bristol to possibly start. So we'll see. There's a lot of unknowns here, but I trust Ed Cooley. You should trust Ed Cooley. And one thing we know about him is he gets the absolute most out of his players, real good in that regard of motivating. And he runs a very short rotation, which we absolutely love for DFS purposes. So definitely, don't write them off right away. They may not win a ton initially, but Ed Cooley will have them competitive. And one of Jaden Epps, Rowan Brumbaugh is going to be super relevant immediately. And I think one will develop throughout. I think both those guys are going to be pretty solid when it's all said and done. Moving on to the Marquette Golden Eagles, who really don't lose anyone relevant. They're the players they're losing combined an average of less than 3 points per game. The only real prospect that maybe was interesting was Emerion Ellis. So they're looking pretty good here. I know Oso Ighodaro was talking about being in the draft there, but it looks like he's going to return. Oliver Maxence Prosper is technically in limbo. We'll see what happens there with him. But as of now, we're looking at Tyler Kolek, Cam Jones, Stevie Mitchell, David Joplin. You guys know I love David Joplin. Sean Jones, who I really, have an affinity for. I think he's a really good jack-of-all-trades type player. Ben Gold and Chase Ross, who at times throughout the season were important bench pieces. So, continuity is really important in college basketball. I say it all the time. I think they're better off without Oliver Maxence Prosper. If you're a Marquette fan, don't boo me here. Throw the, the plastic penises at me. Anyways, so yeah, this Marquette team looks good. They do have some top 100 guys coming in, several 4-stars. Trey Norman, who's a top 100 recruit. Alassane Amadou, who's a 4-star. Zaide Lowry, a 4-star. Don't know how much those guys will factor in coming into a veteran-laden team, but Marquette's just, bringing back everybody. You really have to like the continuity. It's really important in college basketball. You see it all the time. Teams who are one, veterans, and two, have chemistry, established chemistry and continuity with each other, have a tendency to smack those, one and done guys around. And that's why we've seen these rosters get older, obviously from COVID, but also because you can create a winning roster by doing that. And now you have to throw into the equation, doing the right thing in the portal. Marquette hasn't really had to do anything in the portal because they're not losing anyone relevant. They're just adding key pieces. The players that they're losing just aren't going to matter all that much. So Marquette, definitely the cream of the crop in the Big East and a team that's going to be a contender by far. No doubt about it. All right, moving on. Providence. No Ed Cooley goes on to Georgetown. We see all these intra-conference transfers, and you never saw that before. It was like a lot of conferences didn't allow it, or they made you sit out an extra year, or it just was frowned upon, right? And now you see it everywhere. There's so many in-conference transfers every day. There's 2 to 3 more. And we see coaches not transferring, but getting jobs in the same conference. That's crazy to see Ed Cooley go from Providence to Georgetown. It happened. And, Providence, they did a good job. They did a good thing. Kim English comes in as the new coach. Kimmy English, he's a solid coach. He has a good understanding of the game of basketball. Players seem to like him. He did fairly good at George Mason. The first year at George Mason was won 14 games, not great, but he did win 20 games last year. They were definitely headed in the right direction, and he had a solid group around him. Now he heads off to Providence here, takes that job. Kind of a no-brainer for him to take it, right? Gets to stay in that kind of vicinity where he's comfortable at. The roster's definitely going to look different. Ed Crosswell gone. Jared Bynum's off to Stanford. Noah Locke is out the door. Clifton Moore out the door. And Quante Berry decided to transfer. We currently don't know the status of Alan Breed. I do believe he's going to return, but there is a chance he doesn't. Guys returning who are important pieces, Bryce Hopkins, that was a huge one, and also Devin Carter. Now, I think a lot of the reason to do with those guys returning, because normally they would have probably dipped, been like, I want to play for Cooley, I'm out. But that rule I keep harping about, if you're not a grad transfer, if you're an underclassman and you already transferred once, which Carter and Hopkins did, you got to go find a waiver. And the only way to get a waiver right now is if you had a death in the family or a certifiable, sickness or a reason that you have to transfer to be closer to your family, or a mental health issue. And clearly some guys, that we're still waiting for the first, the shooter to drop with the first player to get a waiver for mental health and see how that works out. But I think it was smart on Carter and Hopkins' part to just ride it out. They have a good situation going on there. They're going to, get the ball a lot. They're going to have high usage. It's going to be a situation where they're going to be able to produce really, really well. And they're just, going to be big time DFS players, and they're both going to average well over 25 to 30 fantasy points per game, if not more. So I really like the situation for them, and I think it's a good thing for Providence. I think it's a good thing for them, and I think it's a good thing for us in terms of DFS prop betting and all that good stuff. It's a shame Crosswell's out of eligibility, because I would have liked to have seen him come back. Rafael Castro does come back as well. Castro looked really good on last year's foreign trip, and a lot of people thought he was going to be competitive or at least in the rotation, and it didn't really work out. He wasn't a big factor. So I'll be interested to see how Kimmy English decides to use him. Corey Floyd is somebody that I'm interested to see, and Jaden Pierre. So those are the main returners for Providence: Floyd, Pierre, Castro, Carter, and Hopkins. The transfer portal has been good to Kimmy English, but he got to cheat a little bit, right? Because a lot of these coaches, when they take a new job, they just bring their guys with them. And he's bringing the absolute best options with him from George Mason. Josh Oduro comes over, 16 point per game guy. Now, there was a lot of talk, about Graham Ike coming to Providence, and that ended up being a no-go, because once they decided to bring Josh Oduro, it didn't make sense for Ike to come, right? Because Oduro is going to play, the post, likely going to have to play some center along with Castro, and there was not going to be space for Ike. Wherever Ike goes, ultimately went to Gonzaga, he's going to be the focal point of the post. He's not going to share with Oduro. So that didn't work out. Oduro is a good player. We know that. He was kind of a kryptonite for DFS purposes. How many times would he come into a DFS slate scoring over 30 to 35 fantasy points in each of his last 6? The second you put him on a DFS slate, guy gets 18 fantasy points every single time. George Mason was on a slate 4 times last year, I believe. Every single time he let us down. So hopefully that won't be the case. He'll overcome that. It'll be different to see him playing with Bryce Hopkins. Bryce Hopkins, really, his play style is a lot like Zach Randolph. He's missing shots to pad his rebound stats, which I appreciate. But I don't know that Oduro is going to allow him to grab rebounds like that. So we might see Hopkins' rebounding numbers go down, but at the same time, we'll probably see Oduro's scoring go down. So that might neutralize each other a little bit, but at the end of the day, I do like his prospects on this Providence team. Also gets Devontae Gaines, who I think is pretty solid. I like Gaines quite a bit. Doesn't get talked about a lot, but he was definitely somebody over the last couple of seasons that was an important piece for Kimmy English and George Mason. Devontae Gaines, of course, he played for Tennessee for a couple of years, so he's used to that upper tier competition. He has that experience, even though he was a lesser used guy during those 2 seasons. But for George Mason, he was definitely a adequate 3-point shooter, a really strong rebounder, and a pretty good free throw shooter as well. So he definitely won't be a high usage, high volume guy, but he's pretty efficient at what he does, and I think he's an adequate enough player. As long as he doesn't come into the season priced egregiously at $8K or something like that, this will be one of those guys where he's 5'2", 5'3", and people are just going to overlook him. he's a star. As long as he's a starter, I think he's a great option in day one. So it helps that he knows Kimmy English's system. He's been with him for 2 years. And he's obviously going to be in the mix and probably going to start from day one. They also bring in Justin Fernandez. So that's the third member of the team from George Mason that he brings over. All should be good to go immediately. I don't think none of them need a waiver. Oduro not. Gaines is a grad, so he's good to go there as well. Justin Fernandez, who was a freshman, so he's good to go as well. Fernandez has a lot of upside. Still a pretty raw player. Showed himself to be a really adequate three-point shooter when it came to conference games as the season went on, and I think there's room for him to develop in multiple categories. So I definitely like him too. And that's somebody that's going to be in the mix for big minutes here, but he'll have to play. I mean, there's some high usage guys in front of him, Hopkins, Carter, Oduro, like all those guys are going to get shots before Justin Fernandez. So he's going to have to be able to eat in other ways. And I think he can definitely develop in that regard. And a lot will have to do with Corey Floyd and his development as well. Freshmen that are coming in on the team, number 40 in the ESPN Top 100, Garwi Duell. That was a huge one. A lot of people thought Garwi was going to say sayonara, peace out. Cooley's gone, I'm gone. They were able to keep him, and I think what it is they've pitched to him a lot of early playing time and probably a lot of this, which is fine. That's the era that we live in now. I got no issue with it. I know a lot of people hate it and, oh, what are these kids getting paid? Free college is enough, but pay these kids, man. Pay these kids so that they can ultimately pay us. You know what I'm saying? So Garwi Duell, they've got a nice core here. This Friars team, don't think that just because Ed Cooley's gone that they're going to suddenly fall off the face of the earth. The pieces they're losing, Jared Bynum, a health issue the last couple of years. He'll be good in the Pac-12, but I think he was a little overwhelmed in the Big East. Noah Locke, we know he's a corner-standing three-point shooter. Clifton Moore just never recaptured his productivity from LaSalle, Quante Berry, and Ed Crosswell. Like Crosswell, that one hurts, but you're getting Josh Oduro as your Ed Crosswell replacement, and I don't think anybody's gonna argue that Crosswell is better than Oduro. So I like the position that the Friars are in here, and I like the fact that they also are going to be a veteran-laden team with quite a bit of continuity. The three George Mason guys clearly already know the system, know how to play together. Bryce Hopkins and Devin Carter already know how to play together. You mix those guys in together, and I think it's a pretty strong match made in heaven, and they should do well. Man, why do I got to get allergies every time? All right, St. John's, Ricky P. They get Rick Pitino. I talked 3 weeks ago when we first started doing these off-season shows. I really talked and harped about St. John's for a good 20 minutes, right? I was very unimpressed with the group brought in by Rick Pitino so far, and I'm still a little bit on the fence. But since 2 to 3 weeks ago, I definitely feel better about their prospects going forward. Now, they lose a ton. Pitino came in and said, Joel Soriano is an amazing. We're going to feed him the rock. We're going to build around him. He's going to be a big star in our program. Like, that's all he talked about. And then he also talked about Drisa Trior, who really a high-energy guy. Like, even on his best day, wouldn't be somebody you'd confuse for DJ Rodman. But if you hear Rick Pitino talk about him, he talked about him like he was Charles Barkley reincarnate. And those are the only two guys he really talked about at his introductory presser. And what that did, of course, was alienate the rest of the team. And he proceeded to lose every single other player from the roster. I mean, they are on a total rebuild, which is going to be around our guy, Joel Soriano, who happened to be a first team, all Walt's guy, CBB Supershow, All-American, Joel Soriano, by the way, who had a big season last year, but is going to have an even bigger year this season under Rick Pitino. I don't care if he's 10K this year. When he will be, we're playing him because he's going to absolutely smash, and they're going to feed him the rock often. Please believe. Losing David Jones, who just never was quite the right fit. Losing Andre Curbelo. Hello. Why the hell did they ever get him? Posh Alexander, we know he's going to Butler, another interconference transfer. Dylan Adewusu, who we're going to talk about in a second, he goes to Seton. Montez Mathis, AJ Storr, which was a huge loss. Losing AJ Storr, I think that was a big misstep on Pitino's. I don't want to question a legendary coach like not going to sit here and be that armchair quarterback who says, like, you should have done this, Rick. You should have done this and this. You would have won a title here. Like, the guy's won titles regardless of it being stripped. He's a legendary coach. Like, he knows what he's doing clearly. Like, I'm just the dude that knows who's going to get fantasy points, and I give my take on who I think should play more, right? But I think the AJ Storr was a misstep. I think he's going to develop into an absolute monster. I'm actually really regretful myself, and for dynasty purposes, I gave up AJ Storr a little bit too early, but I was trying to I think I got Jesse Edwards out of that deal. Trying to get myself further in the playoffs and a possible championship. So I sold out on AJ Storr early to try to win that championship. Didn't work out, unfortunately. And now I'm really going to be kicking myself because I'm fairly certain AJ Storr is going to turn into an absolute mammoth monster, like high caliber player who's probably going to be mispriced throughout his time, this season with the Wisconsin Badgers. But we'll get into that when we talk about the Big Ten. But I think that's, like I said, a major misstep. Omar Stanley, that's okay. Raphael Pinson, I thought he showed flashes. Mo Keita, Colby King, and now Isia Niue is also gone out the door. So everybody but Joel Soriano and then Teresa Traore, which unless like I'll bow down to Patino if Teresa becomes like, Big East, doesn't even have to be all first team, like second team, third team, whatever. If he turns Traore into like a viable fantasy option, like I'm going to do the Wayne's World. We're not worthy. For whatever reason, he likes the guy. So that's good enough for me. Soriano's going to be a star. Now, at this point, 3 weeks ago, he had brought in Quinn Zielinski from Iona. Comes over from Iona. So Slinsky's fine. I think he's a good as a role-playing piece here in the Big East. Cruz Davis, another Iona kid who a lot of people are high on. I'm reserving judgment just yet. He's young. He can be molded. I think it's going to be a little bit of a shock for him playing in the Big East, but we'll see. I think it could work. Dennis Jenkins, another Iona guy Dennis Jenkins, awesome. He's a really good scoring guard, but he can also pass the rock ferociously. He averaged about 16 points per game last year for Iona. He also, him and Walter Clayton, just lethal scorers. Jenkins shot about 37%, had an assist rate of almost 30%, great free throw shooter, strong usage rate, like the real deal. It would have been better to get Walter Clayton, who had, one of the best free throw shooters and three-point shooters in the entire country, in the entire world at the collegiate level. He, of course, goes to Florida, so not getting him hurt. But Dennis Jenkins is good. He's going to definitely be a factor. So to that point, that's where they were, and they had brought in Naheem Aline from your world champion UConn Huskies, who Aline's going to come in and be a bench piece, shoot some threes, whatever. They get the VMI kid, Sean Conway, who's also going to be a three-point shooter. And it becomes very obvious what kind of roster Patino's trying to build. He also brings in Saduko Ibin Ayo from Iona as well. So he brings in 4 different Iona players, none of which were Walter Clayton or Nelly Jr. Joseph. Now, of course, Nelly Jr. Joseph wouldn't have made sense because they already have Joel Soriano. But I would have been willing as Rick Pitino to say, you know what, Soriano's going to play the 5, Nelly's the 4, or vice versa. Like, we're going to make this front court work. Screw it. Let's do it. That's just me. But they don't get him. He heads to, New Mexico. Walter Clayton heads to Florida. So he loses out on those 2 pieces. But he does bring in some youngsters. And he recruited, of course, Cruz Davis and Abin Ayo. So he clearly didn't want to quit on either of those guys, and that's fine. So they'll probably be solid role-playing pieces at times, but they're not going to be fantasy relevant. That's just the way it is. Now, as I mentioned, it's very clear what kind of roster they're trying to build. They're going to absolutely feed Joel Soriano. They're going to do what Kentucky should have done with Oscar Tshiebwe. They kind of did with Oscar 2 years ago. For some reason, not so much last year, but force feed Soriano, put him in a position to use his incredible low post scoring ability and great footwork, a la Isaiah Stewart. You guys remember Isaiah Stewart of Washington Husky fame, his freshman season? Like, if he got the ball anywhere on the block or like 5 to 6 feet from the rim, it was a bucket. I know he doesn't do that in the NBA now. I don't follow the NBA as much as you guys probably do. So I don't know what his scoring is like there. But in his freshman season of college, like, he was a walking low post scoring machine. Could not stop him. That's what Soriano is going to be like. He showed it last year. He's shown an ability to hit some mid-range jumpers as well, but they're going to be able to force feed Soriano. And when the defense does decide, hey, we can't guard this guy one-on-one, let's send to help, let's double, then he's going to be able to kick it out. And they're going to have those three-point shooters stationed out there. Naheem Aline, Sean Conway, maybe the development of Cruz Davis at this point. They're going to be, and Dennis Jenkins, who is going to be pretty solid three-point shooter himself. Really, really obvious. It's a fine roster. I said at that point, like, if this is the role-playing aspect to it and they're going to bring in some bigger names, I love it. If this is what we have to work with and this is what he's going to roll out there, I don't love it quite as much. But for fantasy purposes, I love the fact that Soriano is going to be a really high-usage Shaq clone. Since then, they've brought in three pretty integral pieces, none of which are the big name splashes that I would have really gone like, oh, this makes sense. Okay, now I know why you got Naheem Aline, Sean Conway, Zielinski. You loaded up on role players because you've got your Shaq and Kobe here. You've got Soriano and player X. But I don't know that we have player X. He does bring in a guy that has been a favorite of mine from Oregon State, Glenn Taylor Jr., who I think has the ability to really thrive under Ricky P. I think he is going to be a viable fantasy option. Glenn Taylor, not the greatest three-point shooter. He's been about a low 30% three-point shooter this past season, which was up from the prior year. His usage and shot rate went up from his freshman year. He drew a lot more fouls. He actually top 10 in the conference when he was in the Pac-12 at drawing fouls. A very good free throw rate and an excellent free throw shooter. Shot about 84%, sixth best in the conference. Needs to work on his three-point shooting. He can hit mid-range jumpers. He can drive to the basket, and he can score. It's a guy that can score. So if it's a situation where the low block just isn't there, because there's going to be games where Soriano's taken out, right? Like, he's going to have a great season, but there's simply going to be times where they run into a team that game plans to perfection, and he's just not a big factor, and they're going to be able to slow him down. When that happens, who can you turn to get a bucket? What are you going to do? Who can you look to? A guy like Glenn Taylor to get a bucket is absolutely possible. So I like that move. I think it makes sense. They also did a little bit of maneuvering to bring in the UMass kid, RJ Lewis. Louisville looked like the odds-on favorite around RJ Lewis, and of course they needed a guard. And to me, Lewis looks a lot like an L. Ellis clone. Like, I think Lewis has an opportunity to be really, really good. Playing under Rick Pitino is only going to enhance that. I thought going to Louisville was going to be the way for him, and he was going to put up similar numbers to L. Ellis. That's what I thought. He doesn't. They pulled the Jack move. He goes to St. John's, which I like. A roughly 35% three-point shooter. In conference, he was about 40%. Very high steal rate, high fouls drawn rate, adequate rebounder. Passing is moderate. Very high shot rate, very high usage rate. Just a guy that really started to take games over late for the UMass club. The last maybe 5 to 6 games of the season, he missed time. He was mostly a bench piece, but the last 5 or 6 games, they turned to him as a starter, and he had some really strong games. We'll go back to his first start he missed some time, but during that stretch, we'll go back to it was February 18th against Rhode Island. Started and played 19 minutes, 30% usage rate, 14 points, 6 rebounds, hit a couple of key shots down the stretch there in that win. They ended up blowing them out because of how well he played there during that stretch. Then they followed it up with a bad loss to Dayton, but he played 37 minutes, another 30% usage rate, hit a couple threes, had 23 points, had 7 rebounds, 3 steals. Against St. Bonaventure, 14 points, 9 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals. Then finished the season off against Richmond. In all of those games, his usage rate was at least 26%, except for the Richmond game in which it was 22%. But they clearly relied on him heavily. He took a ton of shots, 9+ in each of those starts, got himself to the foul line a lot, and he was a very strong rebounder down the stretch. That wasn't how he rebounded throughout the season, which is why his rebounding rates aren't that great. But the last 5 to 6 games of the season, he was the absolute stud in every facet of the game. So I definitely like this one. I think the tutelage of Rick Pitino and his staff is going to be really good for RJ Lewis. And I do think he has an outside shot to start right away. And then they get the top 100 kid, Brady Dunlap. I don't know what to expect from Brady Dunlap just yet. There is a very cringeworthy TikTok video going around of him. The kid's got no rhythm whatsoever. But as long as he can play basketball, that's all we really care about. To me, he looked like a Duke guy, right? But St. John's, they beat out Villanova, Penn State, North Carolina, and Nebraska for his services. So good size, 6'7", 6'8" kid. Was supposed to go to Notre Dame, but once Mike Brey decided to, take a vacation from college basketball coaching, we'll say, Dunlap decided that, he didn't want to be around, which is fine. He is a pretty good shooter for his size. He definitely has deep range. Consistency is what I think might be the main issue for him. I think there'll be some games where he comes in and he's just knocking down triple after triple. I think people are going to expect that to be the norm, and there might be some chasing to the next game with him. And then he's going to get blanked. He's going to turn in like a sub 5 fantasy point performance at like 30%. Like, I totally see that happening with Dunlap, and we're going to want to really tread lightly and carefully with him. The problem is I think DK is going to have him priced super, super cheap to start, and it's going to be hard to get away from him. But I will caution against that because I do think there's a lot of guys at his position that are better just because they're veterans and they've played already, and they're going to be more equipped to handle that early season grind. It's a bit of a not a culture shock. It's a bit of a shock to one's system when you first get to the speed of the collegiate game and you've dominated high school for so many years and you find out, wow, I'm not the best guy in the court anymore. Let me figure this out. Not a guy that's going to really create his own shot either. He's going to have to rely on Dennis Jenkins to get him shots. He's going to have to rely on the breakdown of RJ Lewis. And the problem of this is they don't have a lot of creators. This is where I think St. John's might get into trouble. Unless Cruz Davis turns into a creator, Glenn Taylor takes the next step. They've supplied all these spot up shooters and guys capable of hitting long range jumpers, but do they have enough creators that are going to be able to get buckets or get shots for others? That I'm unsure of, and that's where I think Brady Dunlap is maybe going to struggle. But I think he's talented enough, and he's going to turn into something adequate and good by season's end. But I do think people might be a little more hyped on him early on just because I see the slate breaking games from him, followed by some real train wreck games. But I do like this roster. It's shaping up just fine. Really looking forward to seeing them play like a foreign trip. I haven't looked at like foreign trip schedules yet or anything like that, but I'm really looking forward to seeing the St. John's group and how they're going to play here and build around Joel Soriano. It looks like, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8. Looks like they have one scholarship left. So we'll see if they can land one more big name or if it's going to be a piece. And this is pretty much what we're looking at here for the St. John's roster. All right, moving on here. Excuse me. You got young kids, sometimes that happens. All right, so Seton Hall, man, it's really, really obvious that Seton Hall doesn't have money compared to the other programs in their conference or across the country. And that's tough because Coach Holloway, Sheen Holloway is a great coach. Like when he took, the Seton Hall gig, brought some guys with him. He was able to hit the portal. He built himself a pretty good roster, I would say. 17-16 wasn't the greatest finish to the year, but they were a competitive team. And the roster he was able to make coming off that great season with St. Peter's was adequate. I thought it was a good-looking roster, right? Dre Davis, Alamir Dodge, Tyree Samuel, Kaderi Richmond, Femi Odekale, who I really like. I'm really shocked he left, but now that I find out they don't really have money, it makes sense, I guess. Casey Ndefo, my man Tay Davis. I love Tay Davis. I think he's going to turn into a star somewhere. I hope he goes to the mid-major level. More on that later. But this is crazy because they have lost all of it. Tyree Samuel, Casey Ndefo, who I believe is out of eligibility. Samuel just straight up saying no. Because Seton Hall, like, their facilities are fine. Everything's fine, but they just don't have the NIL money needed to compete with these other teams. Tyree Samuel heading to Florida from Seton Hall, like, Makes sense geographically. There's better weather and stuff, but he was primed to have a big time role for this team. Trey Jackson gone, Jameer Harris out of eligibility, Alexis Yetna, that was to be expected. He didn't play last year. Femi Odekale, that one to me was a surprise. And then Tay Davis, who was also a bit of a surprise. I thought Tay Davis was, stepping into a larger role this season. And that's just not going to happen. It does sound like, Kadary Richmond, everybody's favorite, the DFS community. When I say everybody, I mean everybody but me. Favorite on Seton Hall, Kadary Richmond is going to be back. So you do get him back. And without Femi, without Tyrese, there's going to be a lot of usage and a lot of shots to go around for him. They do get Alamir Dawes back as well. And it sounds like Dre Davis. So there are some pieces coming back for this team. Dawes, average 13, Richmond about 10, Dre Davis about 9. So there's some scoring returning here. Three of their top 4. That's okay. It's just they lost so many other pieces. They will need guys like Jaquan Harris and Jaquan Sanders to really take that next step. Jaquan Harris has pedigree, has, a lot of upside. I think he's somebody to watch. And then they have some interesting prospects that have come in so far. They were very slow to the portal. Other teams were crushing it. They were getting crushed. And like I said, the NIL money just not there. They do get the high school kid, the 4-star Isaiah Coleman, who I like a lot. I think he's an instant starter, a big-time factor for them. David Tubeck, who's a 3-star. And then for the portal, they get, I already mentioned from St. John's, Dylan Adewusu. I think we'll have to circle that revenge game against St. John's because he's going to be looking to have a big game against them. And then the kid from Austin P, Elijah Hutchins Everett, averaged about 11.5 points per game. Austin P, you guys know my love affair a couple of weeks ago when I did the kind of mid-major talk. That's a team under Corey Gibson that I think is going to do really well. Now, Elijah Hutchins Everett was one of the better players on the team. Almost 7-foot kid. Played center for them, had a high usage rate, high shot rate, a solid shot blocking ability. Not the best rebounder, at least on the offensive side, but he definitely, did his share there. And he's actually a decent three-point shooter for being almost 7-footer, mid-30s guy on 57 attempts. So kind of an interesting piece for Seton Hall. They're going to definitely need him to contribute immediately looking at this roster. So we'll see. As of right now, as of right now, they need a lot of help. I think it's a shame that Holloway's working with a NIL that's not up to par with the rest of the conference because he's a really good coach. And I think that Seton Hall is going to still be that pesky team that you don't want to play. There's going to be inconsistencies with Kadary Richmond as usual. There's going to be some other players stepping up. But I think for DFS purposes, out of this conference, they're probably the most intriguing team by far to me. I think there's more moves to be made for them. Clearly, they have plenty of roster spots open and scholarships available. But again, Jaquan Harris, the guy to watch, I think, overall here, especially with Tay Davis going out. Jaquan has an opportunity to really be good and kind of realize some of his potential. All right. Going to take a quick breather here. I'll be right back. Just got to grab another drink, and then we'll finish up. All right. Moving on from Seton Hall, we have your world champion UConn Huskies. And what we know about the Huskies is the following. Naheem Aline, gone. Another intra-conference transfer headed to St. John's. We know he's gone. Joey Calcaterra, I'm not calling him Joey California. You can't make me do it. You just can't make me do it. Aquasaw, I'm not doing it. Adema Sanogo and Jordan Hawkins, the two most important players clearly for that championship run, are both going to be gone. Let's face it. Sanogo, stock won't be higher than it is now. It's probably still not looking at a high draft pick, but what more do you need? Going out on a championship run that you were a key part of, it's the greatest feeling, right? Jordan Hawkins, man, what a hell of a second season. Like, couldn't have asked for a better run from Hawkins. He had such a good, non-conference run, really good tournament run. He got quiet for a little bit there, but overall, Hawkins is a guy that deserves to play in the NBA and is going to turn himself into an everyday player that's playing I think a key role. He's not going to be like some superstar, right? But he's going to play a key role somewhere. They also lose Richie Springs, who I'm embarrassed, man. Like, I pride myself on knowing a lot of players, most relevant players, and even non-relevant players for every team in all of college basketball. Try to do it for college football. I admit it's pretty rough and hard to do so sometimes. And there are players that sometimes I even like, well, who's that? Richie Springs is somebody that transferred today. Admittedly, I just didn't know that name. I thought, well, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about, walk-ons transferring now? What's the deal here? This kid's going to Quinnipiac? Well, he was a former top 150 kid. So I got to admit that I am embarrassed there about Richie Springs. I think he has an opportunity reading up on him to do quite well, actually, at Quinnipiac. But he is the other member of the team gone. Obviously not going to be a big deal for them considering who was relevant. But 4 key pieces, Aline, Calcaterra, the 2 bench pieces that come on to hit threes, and then the 2, primary options there in Sanogo and Hawkins gone. So that's a big deal. We're waiting to see what happens with Tristan Newton and Andre Jackson. Both are testing the waters. Both will have their opportunity to wow the scouts at the combine, and we'll see what happens. I think there's a really good chance that Newton ends up staying in the draft. And even if he be one of those guys that carves out a living on 2-way contracts, and then eventually goes overseas, and there's no shame in that. Andre Jackson, I think, returns, and I think that's great for college basketball. If Andre Jackson returns, UConn's right back in the title picture. That guy is fantastic. Only averaged 7 points per game, but what does that matter? He rebounds at a high level. He passes at a high level. He's a legit double-double and triple-double threat every time he steps on the court. He can block shots. He can get steals. He can hit threes. I mean, that guy can do everything. Really like Andre Jackson. If he doesn't return, then maybe we backtrack on the Huskies a little bit, but not by much. It also doesn't mean the championship window closes. I stick, me, I'm not a backpedaler. I don't back down from what my thoughts are. And I own all my thoughts, calls, all that stuff. Even if they're wrong, I own it. The Huskies championship window is open for up to 5 years, starting now, 4 to 5 years. And that really does not matter if Newton and Jackson don't return, although it certainly would help, right? Definitely returning are these 2 key pieces. Alex Karaban. I'm the big, I'm banging the drum of Alex Karaban. You guys know I think he's going to be a big time stud in this league, in this conference, in college basketball. And Donovan Clingan, who is, I don't know how to say this without I'm going to sound ridiculous. Those of you who are avid watchers of the show or in the Discord know, but I personally think Donovan Clingan is the best center in college basketball. And I'm not being facetious. I'm not trying to be cute. I'm not trying to give you a hot take. Donovan Clingan is the best big man center in all of college basketball. It's not Hunter Dickinson. It's not Julian Reese, although I am going to be talking about Maryland and Julian Reese on the Big Ten show and how good I think he is. It's not Ryan Kalkbrenner. It's not Braxton Mia. It's Donovan Clingan. And I don't want to say it's not close because obviously it's close, but the combination of raw power, shot blocking ability, size, quickness, he's for a dude that's pushing, 280 and 7'2", he's way quicker than you think. 50% combined rebounding rate, one of the best rebounders, draws a ton of fouls because of it. We know he's going to have to get his fouls under control if he gets more minutes, which he will. Not a 3-point threat. Sanogo turned himself into one. We know that. Adequate enough, footwork, which is going to improve as he gets more shots and more work on offense without Sanogo. But the combination of just power, quickness for his size, and overall basketball skills make him the best center in college basketball. He needs to be polished. I think he will. He's going to take on a much bigger role with the team without Sanogo. And you're going to see next season on what you thought, Klingon, he can't play more than 10 minutes. This guy, he can't stop fouling. He's just, needs a water break. Blah, 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 blah. What, like Klingon, fantasy point per minute wise, there were very few players better. I mean, there were games where he played 12 minutes and had 35 to 40 fantasy points. Legitimately had that happen a lot the first 3 months of the season. As things tightened up the last month of the season, it didn't happen as much, but they shortened up the rotation and Klingon's minutes went down. If Klingon's going to be a 25-minute per game guy at minimum, you're going to see him put up such ridiculous numbers. You're going to be using him on a regular basis, and you're going to be able to think back and be like, man, I can't believe it. Like, Klingon's 8K, and I'm using him? I can't believe what? I never would have thought that. Like, people midseason are going to be like, yeah, I told you Donovan Klingon was going to be good. And, we're using him, and, you heard it here first. It's like, no, you didn't hear it here first. Stills, you heard it from Stills and me, because we are big Donovan Klingon guys. Even when we were obviously proven wrong, Sanogo proved himself. But when Sanogo was struggling, missing his rebounding props, deferring, not shooting the basketball at all, allowing Jordan Hawkins and Tristan Newton to shoot like 40 times a night, it was like, wow, Sanogo, he's got it. Like this guy's good, but Donovan Klingon's a better center. And he was. Donovan Klingon was a better center than Demis Sanogo a lot in the first 3 months of the season. Don't just look at number. Go back and watch every UConn game and tell me that's not the case. I'd thumb my nose at you if you tell me otherwise. Klingon is the best center in college basketball, and he will prove us right at FTN by season's end of 23-24. It's going to be scary. It's going to be ridiculously scary what he's able to accomplish with another summer of development, more quickness, more footwork, more basketball skills, add it with the amazing rebounding ability, shot blocking ability, and get him to, not bite on pump fakes, plant his feet. They're looking at changing some of the charging rules. There's going to be some stuff that protects him a little bit more, and hopefully he doesn't get as much foul trouble with these extended minutes. Because if we're able to get Donovan Klingon on the floor for 25 to 30 minutes, it's an absolute wrap. Absolute wrap. He will average 3.5 fantasy point per minute playing 30 minutes a game, and he'll break every slate. There's really nothing that could make me think otherwise, other than like he comes out the first month of the season, fouls out in 10 minutes every game, and it's like, we can't use this guy, Dub. He's just fouling out every game. Then I'll be like, all right, you know what? You're right. But if he comes out and does what I know he can do, and he stays on the court and doesn't get in foul trouble, it's a wrap. A wrap. He's really good, and you guys are gonna see that. They do bring back also Hassan Diarra, who a decent enough piece. Role player. When he was at Texas A&M, he showed an ability to hit threes. Didn't really make too much at UConn. Ended up getting phased out there. What he was out there to do was typically to harass the other team's best ball handler, and he was fairly good at causing turnovers. Not fantasy relevant. So the class that UConn has coming in, amazing. This class is by far the scariest when it comes to fantasy purposes. I'm just talking about relevant guys who are going to come in and make an impact. And I want to talk about this from a fantasy perspective, because that's really at the end of the day what we care about, right? I want to branch out to just beyond just fantasy, but got to keep my main core base happy here. You've got Kentucky bringing in a hell of a class. You've got Duke bringing in a hell of a class. I get it. I know. Duke and Kentucky, one and dones, are the greatest. Blue bloods, they're so great. Oh, Duke. Duke is so good. Oh, Kentucky. Whatever. Duke's going to have a logjam as usual. Two guys are going to emerge fantasy relevant, and then you're going to have 3 and 4 trading barbs every other game. Good luck trying to figure it out. Kentucky's going to have a guard who absolutely smashes the non-con, and they're going to have a big who smashes the conference, but they're not going to do it together, and you're going to frustrate yourself trying to figure out the pecking order. There's not enough basketball. UConn has a perfect class. They're all going to be able to fall in line. They're going to be able to work together. Positionally, this class makes sense. If they do lose Andre Jackson and Tristan Newton and they need to, play these freshmen, I think they'll be ready immediately. I feel extremely, extremely good about this class. Let's meet them. Let's talk about them. Let's find out who they are. There is a really good chance that 2 to 3 of these guys end up being so good. And I think we might look back on this class a few years from now, especially when they make it to the NBA, because that's when majority of the normies start figuring who out guys are out. And they're might gonna look back and be like, wow, I can't believe, Stephen Castle played on Jalen Stewart's team. Wow, Jaden Ross was on that roster. Like, holy hell, this UConn roster is insane. So they're being called the UConn Fab Five by some. That's a bit cringe for me. I try to keep my cringe to a minimum here on the Super Show where possible. There is the famous, in college basketball circles, recruiting shot. Jalen Stewart, Stephon Castle, Jaden Ross, Solomon Ball, and Yusuf Singare. That's the class coming in, and I got to tell you, they're ridiculous. I'm a big proponent of, building through the transfer portal, continuity, veterans. That's how you win in college basketball today. But this class, ranked 3rd on 247 Sports, this is the best class in America. I know Duke and Kentucky and some other classes are going to be talked about more, but this UConn class is ridiculous. And this is part of the reason why I think the championship window is open, because likely one of those guys will be one and done. 2 of them are going to return. One will be on the fence, and then, we'll see what happens with one of the others. But they're going to continue to recruit at a high level because they just won a championship. They're going to be able to work the portal for adequate pieces because they just won a championship. And they're going to continue to build good rosters under Hurley. And a combination of recruits and transfer portal is really the way to do it. You don't want to lean too heavily on the one and dones. You don't want to lean too heavily on all transfers because of the continuity issue, but you want to have a solid mix of both. And that's where UConn's going to be able to just be a step ahead of the rest, not only in their conference, but across the country. The fact that Alex Caravan and Donovan Clingan, they're potentially going to be a really young team too. This is the opposite of what I have been saying about you got to be an older veteran team. They're potentially going to be really young with their veterans being Donovan Clingan and Alex Caravan. But this roster, this group, this class, they're really good. Jalen Stewart is probably my favorite, and he's a local to Washington State kid, so no surprise there. We'll start with Stephen Castle though. Combo guard, ranked number 8th on the 247 recruiting rankings. Really just fantastic player. McDonald's All-American, very highly touted. Just dunking all over the place. They just had the Hoop Hall Classic a couple months ago, which is a prestigious, game and tournament. And he was just showing off great distance, good range on his jumper. Just surprised me the fact that he was such a willing and accurate passer. And his athleticism is beyond what you would normally see from a high school kid. Like, of all the kids in this group that would be a one and done, it's probably him. So enjoy him while we have him. He's really, really fun to watch. The one knock on him is his consistency as a shooter. He's not afraid to pull up and shoot, so that's fun. But there is some consistency there. He's been compared to Andre Jackson in that regard with his shooting kind of, being a bit lackluster. But he's fun to watch. He's very versatile. I'm excited for him. So that's the key number one piece. Solomon Ball, shooting guard, comes in here. He's pretty athletic. He's not super. He doesn't have like the explosive athleticism of some guys, but he's definitely athletic. Has a little bit of an old school mentality to him. Physical for a guard. He's going to be very physical, and I think he'll fit in quite well in the physicality of the Big East. I think he's going to a real smart coach, going to Hurley, who has a knack for developing guards. I think that's pretty wise move on his decision or on his part. And I think he's going to be able to turn himself into a very good scorer under Hurley. We'll see. I think he's probably like the third or fourth in this class for UConn, but he's going to be one of those guys that'll come in probably on the cheaper side and somebody that we can take advantage of. Now, my guy's Jalen Stewart, small forward, if you will. They even call him that anymore, right? Player in the class. He's local. He's, top 100. Some rankings have him 75th. Some have him 90th. But overall, he's really good. Seattle churns out some ballers. You gotta really respect Seattle. If we could just keep him in the Huskies. This is a kid that I'd hope my UW Huskies could get. But he, didn't want to play for a losing program. Go figure. I think he's a guy whose effort is never questioned. He's going to be able to be a peripherals guy. That's where I really am feeling confident in his abilities. I think, scoring will come, but he's going to be able to be a little bit maybe like a Julian Strother type early on. He's going to be able to, add some rebounds, get some steals, and then everything else comes after that. So I'm probably a little bit higher on Jalen Stewart than most people, but I do think he's going to be a really solid player. And Hurley definitely has a type. He's another guy here who's kind of like a bigger version of Andre Jackson in regards. So you have some guys here who are definitely going to have to work on their scoring, but the toughness, the defense, the necessity, this is going to be a group. Get all, they'll feast on you. Absolutely feast on you. Jaden Ross, another 2-3 kind of combo guy. Really good on defense. Go figure. Another solid defender. I don't know how he's going to fit in for DFS just yet. He's a little bit of a inefficient shooter at times from what I've seen. But he had the league that he played, or the team that he played on the circuit, was very high level guys, guys expected to be in the NBA, and he's played pretty well. So I think that experience against upper tier competition on the circuit will suit him well. I'm a little bit down on him overall offensively, but he's going to be somebody who's peripherals. This is where it's going to be in, like, we're going to have to let pricing dictate who we roster here of this group on UConn early on, outside of the Caravan Klingon group, because I think variance with the offensive side for those freshmen, but I think all going to have other categories, which gives them a little bit more of a safer floor than maybe a normal freshman would have. And then lastly, the 7-footer, Youssef Singare, the 7-foot kid there. He elite rim protection, that goes without saying. 7 feet, right? He's a little bit it's like 230, 220. So I think he needs to gain some weight a little bit, right? But obviously with his size, and he's got some hops. He's a great shot blocker, is what he's done so far. We'll see. I mean, Klingen's ahead of him, obviously. So what we saw with Klingen backing up Sonogo, I think that's what we see here with Singare. He will be the least relevant when it comes to fantasy purposes. I think he'll be one of those guys similar to Klingen in his first year where his fantasy point per minute will be high, but he's going to be looking at like 9 to 15 minutes from a game-to-game basis. And he'll be able to, early on in the non-con against weaker teams, just absolutely go in there for 10 minutes and grab 12 rebounds, dunk, times, whatever, and put up some pretty good scores. He's pretty, I'd say, agile. Like, remember when a Cook was there, the type of I don't know, you watch Cook on the fast break. He's pretty agile. He's similar to him. But he's not somebody who's going to be that relevant, I think, for DFS purposes. So obviously Castle, Jalen Stewart, and then probably I want to say Ross, because I think he's the one that develops the most under Coach Hurley. But this class is phenomenal. And it'll be easier if Jackson comes back because that will put less pressure on Ball and Ross. But if they got to go, they got to go. So we'll see. And if that happens, then they've got to hit the portal. And as I said, the guys who come back from the, they get the draft news and they're not going to get drafted as high as they thought or at all. They come back. Those guys that are in the portal, there's going to be an influx of talent here still available. So UConn will still have opportunity to bring in some guys and do some damage. All right. We just got a couple teams left here, and we'll wrap up. Villanova, Cam Whitmore, of course, gone. We knew he'd be a one and done. Brandon Slater is, I believe, out of eligibility. He's gone either way. Caleb Daniels, Angelo Breezy, also gone as he transferred. Returning is Eric Dixon, so they get him back. Mark Armstrong, of course. Second-year Mark Armstrong should be pretty improved. Jordan Longino, who I think has upside. Trey Patterson, and Justin Moore. That was a big deal having Justin Moore return. So getting some key pieces back in Dixon and Moore, and then another year of Mark Armstrong and Longino, which I think will be good for them. Now, they haven't done much on the recruiting trail. That's to be expected. They have a 3-star coming in by the name of Jordan Dumont, whatever. Where they brought in some, or where they won a little bit in the transfer portal, is bringing in a couple of strong guard pieces that will fit in well with their roster. TJ Bamba of Washington State, who I'm way less enamored with. This is a guy that the industry is very high on. I'm not. But I do think he fits in well with this Villanova team. I think he's a little similar scoring-wise to Justin Moore sometimes, so I'm not sure how that'll work. But he did average 16 points per game for Wazoo, and he kind of came out of nowhere as a role player the last year into one of the best players on their team this season. And then Hakeem Hart from Maryland. So I like Hakeem Hart. His first season at Maryland, he showed some real big flashes of being a star. It never really worked out, but he has turned himself into a fairly consistent basketball player and somebody for DFS purposes that people rarely roster. Now his price would be like 6.5 or 6K, and it wasn't worth rostering him. But anytime he dipped below 6K, he was kind of an auto 4X. And I think for Villanova, he's a better version of Brandon Slater in that role. And he has the opportunity to play big minutes like Slater did at times, but contribute in a lot more categories and be a much more viable fantasy option. So I do like Hakeem Hart in this offense playing next to Justin Moore. He won't be relied on to be a scorer, but he can definitely add that to his game. And he's going to frequently draw the lesser of the defenders because the defense is going to have to pay attention to Bamba and Moore. So it's a good situation for Hakeem Hart to be in, and I'm definitely a fan of his game and think DFS-wise and fantasy-wise, he's definitely going to be good. Now, the last team here is Xavier, the Musketeers, Colby Jones, Jack Nungy, Soli Boom, Adam Kunkel, all gone. That's 4 double-digit scorers. They had 5 this season, losing 4 of those 5. That's tough for anyone. Kai Tandy, it never worked out for him there. Cesare Edwards, Deontay Miles, and Elijah Tucker will all be gone as well. So they're losing a huge part of their roster and having to turn it over for the most part, but they do get some key pieces back. A healthy Zach Fremantle, which is huge, a developing guard in Desmond Cloud, who, showed flashes of a guy that could really, take over in short spurts. And I think with Sully Boom gone, he'll be able to pick up a lot of that usage. Jerome Hunter, who showed himself to be a very adequate, backup big, but then turned into, when Fremantle got hurt, a guy that you could throw in the starting lineup and rely on. And he came through for the most part. And then Cam Kraft. So those are the four main returners. They do well in the recruiting side of things. 2 top 100 guys in Trey Green and Dallin Swain, a 4-star in Reed Ducharme, and a 3-star in Kachi Nezai. Those are the recruits. Then they bring in a couple of big names from the transfer portal that I think will do quite well. Now, Logan Duncombe from Indiana, who's going to be a guy, similar to what Jerome Hunter was behind Fremantle. Duncombe will just provide some insurance, some toughness, some rebounding ability. If Hunter or Fremantle will get hurt, you could get Duncombe in there without losing too much on the defense and on the glass. He's not going to give you a lot of scoring, but at least you're not going to be, giving up a million rebounds or a million points down low. They also get the North Texas transfer, Abu Osman, who I think is going to be quite well in this system. Fremantle, who can play a little bit of that, similar to Jack Nunji. That's why he did so well. Some of that inside-outside game. Fremantle, he shot 22 threes, so it's not like he's out there bombing away. He did make 14 of them. I think he'll have the opportunity, and he got hurt a lot, right? Missed a lot of time. I think he'll have the opportunity to kind of stretch that out and pick up a lot of the Jack Nunji, 3-point shot attempts as a big. We know how good of a rebounder he is. We know how a strong passer Fremantle is. So a healthy Fremantle is going to be a big-time fantasy producer and a big-time guy for Xavier to help them win games. Now, Usman, his game will be a good fit, I think, next to Fremantle. He will be more of a, back to the basket, rim protector, using his fouls, a really good offensive rebounder. He'll be able to extend possession. So if, shots are missed, he's collecting those boards and kicking back out. He just played with Kai Huntsberry and Tyler Perry over at North Texas. Both guys, really good shooters, good offensive players who really benefited from playing next to Abu because of those extended possessions, and he was able to grab rebounds. And even a guy like Reuben Jones played well with Osman. So I think he'll fit in well there as a kind of a yin to the Fremantle Yang. And then guards-wise, Quincy Olivari from Rice and Davion McKnight from Western Kentucky. Now, I don't love the Quincy Olivari ad. I know this is another one that I'm different than the industry on. I know he averaged almost 20 points per game at Rice. I know he's good. But to me, he wasn't, even though he scored the most on Rice, I don't believe him to be the best statistical or even the best overall player on Rice. I think Travis Evie at times was often better. I think Max Fiedler was often more important. I really, really like those guys and how often we're able to use Fiedler and Evie over the chalky Olivari and just punish the rest of the industry. So maybe that I'm letting that, cloud my judgment. I don't think Olivari comes in here and becomes Sully Boom. A lot of people think, that's just the 1-for-1. Sully Boom's out of eligibility. Here comes Quincy. He's going to jump in there and take over and have the season Sully Boom just had. And I don't think that's going to be the case. I think where Olivari's at his best is if he's not a role player, not a high-level role player, right? He's a contributor. He's a guy that, when you need a bucket, you can go to. But if he's the number one option, I think there's a problem with that. I'm just not a believer in him being able to pull that off. When Xavier got down or there was foul trouble or ineffectiveness, Sully Boom made something happen. And I'm not entirely convinced at this level against these defenders in the Big East that Quincy Olivari will be able to do what Sully Boom did and make things happen. I'm just not. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I just don't see that with him. I think he'll be adequate. I think he'll be good. But if he comes out like 9K or something crazy, it's an easy fade for me. I'll let everybody else roster him expecting, the Sully Boom 40 fantasy point game. I just won't. I'm not there with him. I do like Davion McKnight from Western Kentucky. I think he has the chops to be really good. You look at Olivari's numbers, 36% three-point shooter, 30.5% shot rate. He was an 80% free throw shooter. And then you turn around and you look at Davion McKnight, and you might wonder, well, what makes you think he's going to be the Sully Boom, replacement? He was a 32% three-point shooter, good free throw shooter, definitely, high usage rate, very good on-ball defender, made life really miserable for the guy that he would have to guard, and he's a solid enough passer, had an assist rate, oftentimes pushing 30%. That aspect of his game to me is where he'll be more similar to Boom, in that he's going to be able to involve the rest of the team more. He's going to be able to create for his teammates. Whereas I don't think Olivari is going to be out there creating for others. He's going to mostly be creating for himself, or he's going to need to get created for. And that's where I think he's more of a third or fourth option, where he's going to be best. If Xavier uses him as the third option, then he's fine. If they have to rely on him as the alpha for more than, a couple, short stretches, a game here or there, they might be in trouble. We saw him take over stretches for Rice at times, but Rice, honestly, you look back, and I watched a lot of Rice games. I'm a psycho like that. Whenever Rice was on the slate, I always rostered Travis Evie. I always rostered Max Fiedler. I just sat back and let them do their thing and watch those guys put up 6, 7x, while Olivari put up his 3.5 to 4x. So as long as he's not the alpha, I think it's fine. But if he has to become that, it's going to be tough. I think McKnight's ability to make things happen, initiate offense, create for others, that to me is a little more intriguing. I definitely will want to see how pricing is there on that first part. But I like what Xavier's done. I definitely think X is, considering you're losing so much of your scoring, a lot of teams would be dead to rights and just no chance of competing after that. But I think they'll definitely compete. As long as, Desmond Claude, he comes and makes that next step in his second year, and really he himself also absorbs a lot of that, role that Sully Boom's leaving, they'll be just fine. I know Jerome Hunter's going to be good. I know Zach Freemantle is going to be good. I know that Olivari, McKnight, and Usman are going to contribute in terms of fantasy and statistics and whatnot. But it's mainly just seeing how this pecking order for Xavier shakes out. If it ends up that Cloud is like a star, then they're the best scenario ever, right? Because Freemantle and Desmond as your 1 and 2, Olivari, McKnight trading the 3 and 4. Usman does his thing on the offensive glass, and then you've got the role players, in Trey Green and Dalen Swain, and then they can take their time and develop properly. And then Logan Duncombe is just, like I said, there for insurance. So Xavier, they definitely have some work to do with Freemantle coming back from the injury, Desmond's development, but they're in a good spot. If there's a team here that maybe is a dark horse, where maybe people overlook a little bit, like not fully overlooked, but no one's going to be picking them to win the conference, Xavier's a dark horse. They're well coached. They have a good roster. They're definitely going to be in the mix. So that is it for the Big East. I really like what I'm seeing out of this. I think we're going to see Big East from a DFS and fantasy perspective be very profitable, be very fun. There's going to be a ton of offense and just really fun games to watch. But at the same time, there's going to be some quality one-on-one individual defense. There are, guys like Posh Alexander are really going to step up and become, even better defenders than before. We know UConn's going to defend at a high level. We know Seton Hall under Coach Holloway, they'll defend at a high level. They've got some question marks on offense. St. John's is going to get their things going under Patino. Kimmy English had an interesting lineup. Marquette, of course. Like, there's a lot to like in this conference, and Big East should definitely send multiple teams 5+ to the tournament with relative ease. So I like what I see out of them, and I think they're going to be one of our favorite conferences when it comes to DFS slates and loading them up as much as possible. All right, so that will wrap it up for next week. We're going to be talking Pac-12. I was considering saving them for later, but just want to get it over. I just want to talk about the Washington Huskies more in depth, right? So next week, Pac-12. We'll talk about the job Mark Madsen of Cal, man. Like, Stanford's, how much is Stanford kicking themselves in the ass right now? Mark Madsen goes to a doormat of a Cal program that hasn't been relevant in a decade and goes out and just smashes the portal. I mean, this Cal team is going to be so much better than what we've seen. Mark Madsen, man. I mean, the thing people are saying is that Stanford is going to come out, after Haas has another surely lame duck season, Stanford will throw the bag at him. But don't we think other teams and other programs are going to also throw a bag at him? I mean, there's no guarantee he goes to Stanford, even though it's his alma mater, right? So we'll see. But he's done, man. Jalen Cone, Mike Meadows, Keontae Kennedy, Fardaz Imac, and Jalen Tyson. They get Jalen Tyson, my man, Jalen, who I thought was the absolute perfect fit at Auburn. Thought for sure he was going to go there. He goes to Cal. I have to see him 2 to 3 times. As a Husky fan, I have to see Jalen Tyson 2 to 3 times next season. Man, that's tough. That's tough. I love the job Cal and Mark Madsen are doing right now. So we'll go in depth next week. There will be USFL content, of course, WNBA content coming up. There's just, I'm all over the place. I'm in it to win it. I'm grinding here with you guys. Appreciate the continued support. These shows will be on demand. So as, you get ready to really crunch and get ready for the season, you can go back and watch the various episodes on the Supershow playlist, conveniently provided by the FTN Network on YouTube. Appreciate you guys who continue to tune in and support the show. We'll see you next week. Continue to do your thing. Enjoy your summer. Have fun with the kids. Do your thing. Go to the carnivals. Get ready, because before you know it, it's going to be college basketball season, and John Rothbot will be doing his countdown, and we'll be in it to win it. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. See y'all next week.